Vivian Kensington had always been the subject of whispers around the prestigious Lincoln Park neighborhood. Wealthy, beautiful, mysterious, and constantly surrounded by younger men, she had undeniably behind closed doors earned herself the nickname the Sugar Mommy. Since the tragic passing of her husband 5 years ago, Vivian's wealth had only grown, but with it came a creeping sense of isolation. And it wasn't long before her obsession shifted to her new neighbor, a charming but financially struggling young man named Jacob. Jacob, a recent college graduate, moved into the upscale neighborhood with aspirations of finding a stable job. Instead, he found himself caught in the crosshairs of a wealthy widow's dangerous fixation. Jacob Harding, a 22-year-old art student, had his own share of difficulties after graduation trying to find his way in the world. With student loans looming over his head and the art world proving to be more competitive than he imagined, moving into his aunt's guest house in the affluent Lincoln Park neighborhood felt like a temporary lifeline. He had charm, an artistic flair that drew attention, especially from women. His laid-back, easygoing nature, paired with his talent, made him a favorite in social circles. Someone who enjoyed casual flirting, but never let things get too serious. The area was far more affluent than what he was used to, and it introduced him to a new circle of people, including his neighbor, Vivian Kensington. Vivian was someone Jacob saw in passing at first driving in her Porsche. In her mid-50s, she was still striking, with an elegance that commanded attention, and always dressed in the finest clothes. She had a presence that couldn't be ignored. Vivian was well known in the Lincoln Park community, not just for her wealth, but for her commanding personality. She had been married to a prominent businessman 10 years older than her, and had passed away due to illness around 7 years ago. While their marriage had appeared stable on the surface, there was always something missing. Vivian hadn't realized it at the time, but money had been more important than love in their relationship, for both sides. Now a wealthy widow, her life seemed glamorous, but behind the facade there was a lingering loneliness. Vivian's life had shifted after her husband's death. Once a key player in the social elite, she had become more withdrawn, though she was still charming enough to maintain her influence. While most saw her as a charming and wealthy socialite, those who had been around long enough knew the rumors, whispers about her sugar mommy reputation. People often spotted her at fancy restaurants or lavish parties with men much younger than her. Sometimes they were out-of-town visitors, but occasionally she'd have a younger man from the neighborhood at her side. The local gossip never clarified whether Vivian's allure came from her beauty or her money, but the term sugar mommy clung to her. But there was a darker side. People and friends of her late husband whispered about her need to control those around her, especially her lovers. This lack of genuine emotional connection left her yearning for control, something she found with the younger men she courted. And now, Jacob would soon know. Jacob and Vivian first crossed paths at a neighborhood anniversary party for a local couple. Jacob, always one to enjoy attention from women, was immediately drawn to Vivian's confidence and beauty, despite the obvious age gap. He had always been popular with the ladies, his artistic charm adding to his appeal, and he relished in the casual flirtations that often came his way. Vivian took notice of this as well. But unlike the other women Jacob met, she wasn't interested in a fleeting moment. She wanted more. Over time, their acquaintance grew. Initially, they'd just exchanged pleasantries at social gatherings, but the distance between them steadily closed. At first, Jacob saw no harm in their growing rapport. After all, Vivian was just a friendly, attractive widow, but what Jacob didn't realize was that his name was being added to the list of men who had unwittingly fallen under her spell. And it wasn't long before Jacob found himself being invited over for wine and flirtatious banter in the evenings, or joining Vivian at one of her lavish dinners, which provided a relief from his financial struggles. He enjoyed the attention, but thought little of it. To him, she was simply a beautiful neighbor, a lonely widow who needed a friend. But to Vivian, Jacob was quickly becoming something more, something she wanted to possess. Little did they know everything was about to change catastrophically, because the dynamic between Jacob and Vivian began to shift the day he met Emily Lockwood. Emily was a driven young woman working at a very famous marketing firm in a neighboring suburb. Emily was everything Jacob had been looking for: smart, independent, and refreshingly unconcerned with his financial situation. Her intelligence and wit captivated him, and before long, their casual dates turned into a serious relationship. At first, Jacob maintained friendly ties with Vivian, meeting her for coffee or accepting her invitations to glamorous events. But as his relationship with Emily deepened, Jacob found himself wanting to pull back, feeling the need to distance himself from Vivian's increasing presence in his life. However, Vivian had other plans. For her, Jacob had been more than just a young neighbor. He was a canvas, someone she could shape, control, and keep close, and occasionally engage in intimate relations. The moment she learned of Emily, something inside her snapped. Jacob's attention was shifting, and she couldn't bear it. At first, she tried subtle methods, sending him increasingly extravagant gifts. It started with small things, a new designer shirt, a luxury watch, and even expensive art supplies. But when Jacob tried to refuse, her attempts became more brazen. She offered to pay off his student loans entirely, whispering with a sly smile, "You don't need to worry about money, Jacob. I can take care of everything." Jacob knew he couldn't keep up with this dynamic. As the months passed, subtle changes began to surface. Vivian's behavior turned erratic. She started showing up at his guest house unannounced, draped in suggestive clothing that left little to the imagination. There were evenings when she'd stand too close at parties, her fingers brushing Jacob's arm, her lips whispering flirtatious promises in his ear. At one party, Jacob felt trapped in a moment when she leaned in, breathing, "I know you think about me. You can't hide it forever." What made it worse was that, on the surface, Vivian still acted like a caring friend. This duality made it harder for Jacob to cut ties completely, and for a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. Vivian could maintain her infatuation, and Jacob could carry on with his life. However, as the months passed, Jacob's distance only fueled Vivian's possessiveness. Then came the final straws. One evening, while Emily was inside his guest house, Vivian showed up unannounced. Dressed provocatively and smelling of expensive perfume, she kissed Jacob the moment he opened the door, pressing her body against him. Jacob immediately pulled away, his face flushed with anger and shock. "Vivian, you can't keep doing this!" he snapped, glancing nervously toward the guest house, hoping Emily hadn't seen. Vivian's face twisted in fury. "You think she's better than me, Jacob? She can't give you what I can." The confrontation between Emily and Vivian wasn't long in coming. A few days later, Emily and Vivian crossed paths at a coffee shop in the neighborhood. Crossed paths is putting it lightly. Vivian was out shopping when she saw Emily and decided to follow her and see what she was doing. Tensions boiled over when Emily confronted Vivian. "I know what you're trying to do, Vivian. You need to stay away from us," Emily said, her voice steady, but with an underlying edge of anger. Vivian smiled coldly, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. "Oh, Emily, sweet Emily. Do you really think he's going to stay with you? I've seen them come and go, but Jacob, he's different. You'll never keep him." Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground. "He's not your toy, Vivian. Whatever you're trying to do, it ends now." But Emily wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold, and though Emily feared what might happen next, she couldn't have known just how far Vivian would go to claim what she believed was hers. Vivian, enraged by the idea of Jacob slipping out of her control, began spreading rumors about Emily in their shared social circles. At neighborhood gatherings and parties, Vivian would casually drop comments that painted Emily in a bad light, hinting that she was only interested in Jacob for his potential connections, or that she had been unfaithful in past relationships. The gossip began to circulate, creating tension for Jacob and Emily, who soon felt the strain on their relationship. Despite this, Jacob stood by Emily. However, Vivian's obsession had grown beyond just infatuation. It was now an all-consuming need to control every aspect of his life. When Emily confided in Jacob about the rumors and the discomfort she was feeling, Jacob knew he had to confront Vivian directly, and so he did. He met her one evening and said, "I can't keep doing this. Things with Emily are serious now. We're moving in together, and I need you to stop. The time we spent together was good, but this can't continue." Vivian, pleading with him, replied, "But Jacob, we had something special. Don't throw it all away just because of her. I can give you everything you need, everything she can't." This angered Jacob, and he firmly said, "Vivian, I know what you're doing. You're spreading lies about Emily, and it has to stop. I told you before. We're moving in together. It's over between us." Vivian didn't respond, but her cold stare spoke volumes. Jacob walked away, believing he had ended things for good, unaware of just how far Vivian's obsession would go. What had begun as an obsession in her mind now turned into something far more sinister. She began stalking Jacob and Emily, following them on dates, watching from her car as they walked hand in hand, and even monitoring their social media accounts obsessively. Her desperation for control over Jacob's life consumed her every move. There were times when Vivian would sit in her car for hours, parked just outside the restaurants they visited, watching them through tinted windows. She became an ever-present shadow in their lives, constantly tracking their whereabouts. But that wasn't the worst of it. One evening, while Jacob and Emily were spending a quiet night at his guest house, Vivian sneaked into the backyard. Crouched near the bushes, she peered through the window and saw the couple cuddling on the couch, watching a movie. In a fit of rage and jealousy, she pulled out her phone and began snapping pictures of them, seething as she watched them laugh and share intimate moments. For Vivian, this was no longer just about Jacob's attention. She wanted to destroy the relationship. In her most unhinged move yet, Vivian targeted Emily's professional life. She anonymously contacted Emily's employer, a senior partner at the marketing firm where Emily worked, and started spreading vicious rumors about her. She told the employer that Emily suffered from severe mental health issues, that she had uncontrollable fits of rage, and that she was a ticking time bomb in the workplace. The accusations were damaging, but fortunately, Emily had a stellar reputation at work, and her boss dismissed the claims. Still, it added strain to Emily's already tense life, knowing that Vivian was trying to sabotage her career. But Vivian didn't stop there. Emily soon started receiving threatening, anonymous letters in her mailbox. The messages were vile, filled with hateful words. They ranged from slut-shaming her, calling her ugly and worthless, to explicit threats that she would never be good enough for Jacob. "You'll never keep him," one letter read. "He deserves better, and you know it." Emily was horrified. The letters rattled her deeply, but she felt trapped. The letters were anonymous, and she knew how much influence Vivian had with her wealth and connections. Reporting them felt of no use. Despite this, Jacob stood by Emily, oblivious to the lengths Vivian was going to in her efforts to break them apart. In Vivian's mind, Emily was the obstacle standing between her and Jacob, and she was determined to remove that obstacle, no matter the cost. It all started with Jacob texting Emily on Thursday, trying to plan their next meetup. It was their usual routine to spend Friday evenings together, but this time, Emily told him she was swamped with work. She had a few international clients flying in the following week and had been putting in long hours at the office. Her text, which would soon be found by the authorities, read, "I'm so tired, Jacob. I don't know if I'll be able to meet this weekend. Just need to catch up on some rest." Jacob understood. Emily was ambitious and took her work seriously, but something about the tone of her texts seemed off. She wasn't her usual bubbly self. Wanting to check in, Jacob gave her a call later that night, hoping she might be free to talk for a few minutes. But there was no answer. He reasoned that maybe she had fallen asleep early, too exhausted to respond. By Friday morning, Jacob's concern grew. He tried calling her again, but was met with the same silence. Later that afternoon, he received a text from her number. "Out of battery. I'll text you when I'm home." The message felt odd. It didn't sound like her usual self. Too abrupt, too cold. Jacob brushed it off, telling himself he was just being paranoid. But that lingering feeling of dread began to gnaw at him. By Saturday evening, Jacob's worry had morphed into full-blown anxiety. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. So, he decided to drive over to Emily's apartment to check in on her. As he pulled up, his confusion deepened. Her car was parked in the driveway, though she had said she wasn't home. Standing outside her door, Jacob noticed something else. A small pile of unopened Amazon packages stacked on her doorstep. Emily was never one to leave packages outside, especially for days. His heart began to race. He rang the doorbell and waited, but there was no answer. Feeling his pulse quicken, Jacob reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before turning it. To his horror, the door was unlocked. Panic set in. He slowly pushed the door open, stepping inside the apartment. The air inside felt heavy, thick with an eerie silence. His eyes scanned the living room. Something was off. There were papers strewn across the coffee table, a wine glass knocked over on the floor, and the lamp by the window was shattered. It looked like there had been a struggle. Jacob's mind raced as he cautiously made his way deeper into the apartment. The sense of dread was almost suffocating now. Every step he took felt like a lifetime, his thoughts swirling with the worst possibilities. When he reached the bedroom, his stomach dropped. The sight before him would be burned into his mind forever. Emily's body lay sprawled across the floor, frozen in place. Her clothes were torn, her face bruised, and her lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Blood stained the carpet beneath her, and there were clear signs of a violent confrontation. Jacob's legs gave out, collapsing in shock as the horror unfolded before him. He screamed her name, but it was futile. Emily was gone. The police were called, and an investigation quickly ensued. What they uncovered over the following days would send shockwaves through the neighborhood. The investigation into Emily's murder began with confusion and heartbreak, but it quickly spiraled into something much darker. As detectives scoured her apartment for clues, they found disturbing signs of a violent altercation: broken glass, overturned furniture, and traces of blood near the living room carpet. However, the police soon realized this wasn't just a random act of violence. There was something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. In the days following Emily's death, detectives started piecing together the puzzle. It wasn't long before whispers from the neighborhood about Vivian Kensington's erratic behavior started circulating. Neighbors came forward, recounting how Vivian had been spreading malicious rumors about Emily for weeks, insinuating that she was mentally unstable and unfit for a relationship with Jacob. Jacob, still in shock from finding Emily's body, met with the detectives and made a chilling confession. He was certain Vivian had something to do with Emily's death. He told them about her obsessive behavior, the uninvited visits, the extravagant gifts, the stalking. Jacob even shared the hate mail that Emily had been receiving for weeks, letters full of vile insults, slut-shaming, and anonymous threats. The detectives couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. Vivian, once seen as a harmless socialite, now became a prime suspect. They questioned her multiple times, but she maintained her innocence. She played the grieving friend, someone who was shocked and devastated by Emily's death. But behind her facade, the truth was unraveling. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered the first significant piece of evidence: a GPS tracking device hidden underneath Emily's car. It had been placed there weeks before the murder, allowing Vivian to follow Emily's every move. Further investigation revealed even more damning evidence. The police obtained phone records, which showed a string of harassing calls and messages sent to Emily and Jacob from an anonymous number. When the detectives traced the number back, they discovered it was tied to a burner phone that Vivian had purchased under a fake name. It was a clear sign that she had been planning her moves with calculated precision. The turning point came when detectives reached out to Emily's workplace, which had recorded one of the anonymous calls Vivian made about Emily's behavior, and when they played it for Jacob, he instantly recognized the voice. It was unmistakably Vivian. With the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, the detectives were able to reconstruct the events leading up to Emily's death. Security footage from a nearby camera showed Vivian's car parked near Emily's apartment the night she was killed. Detectives theorized that Vivian, pretending to reconcile, had shown up uninvited with a bottle of wine, perhaps offering to mend fences and move on from the past. Inside Emily's apartment, they found 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter, both of them half drunk. The bottle of wine had been emptied. The scene suggested that things had started amicably, but soon escalated into chaos. The broken glass and overturned furniture pointed to a struggle, likely fueled by alcohol. But the autopsy revealed something far more chilling. Emily hadn't died from the struggle alone. The coroner's report showed traces of a lethal poison in Emily's system. Vivian had poisoned her. The blood on the carpet was from when Emily had collapsed and hit her head after losing consciousness, but the cause of death was the poison. It was a calculated move, one that revealed the depth of Vivian's obsession. She had planned the murder, ensuring that Emily's death appeared as a tragic accident or a drunken mishap. As the walls began to close in on Vivian, She continued to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. When police searched her phone, they found a collection of photos, pictures she had secretly taken of Jacob and Emily together, evidence of her stalking behavior. Vivian had meticulously documented her obsession, capturing intimate moments between the couple from afar. Eventually, Vivian was taken into custody. Her trial was a media sensation, with Jacob and a few other neighbors testifying against her. The prosecution laid out the trail of evidence, from the GPS tracker to the harassing calls and the anonymous tip to Emily's employer. Vivian Kensington's trial was a dramatic spectacle. Despite her lawyer's attempts to paint the crime as the result of a moment of passion and mental instability, the jury was unmoved. The evidence painted a clear picture of a premeditated act fueled by obsession. Vivian's calculated behavior, coupled with her attempts to manipulate the narrative, only solidified her guilt in the eyes of the court. And so, in 2018, Vivian was convicted of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fitting punishment for a crime that had shattered so many lives. The legal system had seen through her facade, and she was left to grapple with the reality of her actions that had irrevocably altered the lives of everyone involved. Jacob Harding's life was forever changed by the events that unfolded. The weight of Emily's death and the knowledge that he had been part of a tragic spiral of obsession and violence was a heavy burden to bear. The guilt he felt was compounded by the fact that he had failed to recognize the signs of Vivian's dangerous fixation until it was too late. His once bright future as an art student was overshadowed by the trauma of losing Emily and being ensnared in Vivian's destructive obsession. Unable to cope with the constant reminders of the past and the haunting memories of Emily's murder, Jacob decided to leave Lincoln Park. He moved to a new city, hoping to escape the shadows of the crime that had marked his life. The trauma lingered, and the scars of the ordeal remained with him. In the end, Vivian Kensington's story became a stark reminder of how obsession, when left unchecked, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. What began as a seemingly harmless acquaintance evolved into a deadly fixation, culminating in a crime that left a lasting impact on everyone involved, serving as a lesson on the dangers of letting obsession dictate one's actions. If you want to see more videos like this, click on the video you see on your screen.